This episode is a bit different. Today's conversation on field frequency isn't about chargers, uptime, or utilization curves. It's about people. Eduardo Espinal has spent nearly a decade inside the EV industry, building projects, leading teams, and watching the space shift from mission-driven to capital-driven. We talk candidly about what happens when the vision turns into theater, when talent becomes a fundraising prop, and when companies forget that human layer behind the infrastructure. If EV is going to mature, this is a conversation that we have to be willing to have. Let's talk about it. Welcome to another episode of Field Frequency. Today, I'm happy to have my friend Eduardo Espinal. Thanks for being on, Eduardo.
Thanks, Jason, for having me. It's awesome to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Well, looking forward to our conversation. Field Frequency, every episode is sponsored by Field Advantage, a national field service company specializing in EV charger maintenance. We bring subject matter experts from all across the value chain to get online, get on the microphone and rap about EVs, EV charging, EV software, EV networks, all those things. And so very happy to have Eduardo here today to speak with. Eduardo, if you could just kick things off with your origin story, how you ended up in EV. I know your time in the industry has been spread across some marquee brands like ChargePoint and other places. And
Sure.
I know you're doing all kinds of things, even an adjunct professor at your alma mater. So give us your background, give us your story, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yes, certainly have had quite a journey throughout the sustainability space specifically and non-sustainability space, but I'm a servant leader first. And the way I view myself is I always look at things from a lens of what's the purpose. So my journey really started in the heart of the traditional automotive world. That's where I was at before the regular, where I ended up in the EV space. I was at a company called Urban Science, and I was managing teams of data scientists for some heavyweights that like BMW, JLR, Volvo, and Subaru. Our team was crunching numbers, setting sales objectives, and performing blueprint analysis to ensure that, when they needed to open a new dealership, that those new dealerships didn't violate franchise agreements. So at one point, I was contracted out to work directly for Audi of America in DC. I remember being at an all-hands sales kickoff meeting, and we were all pushing blue diesel. And when the truth came out about the reality about that technology, of what was happening, it hit me hard. I looked at my twin boys, my wife. I realized that I was doing something that I wasn't proud of. And I just said to the universe, man, put something out there that I would be proud of, that I can tell my boys and my family that I did something. So shortly after that, when I was at Urban Science, a client, JLR, asked if I had any data on EVs. They were thinking about electric vehicles. I didn't know the brand or name or what they were going to do, but they said, hey, but Michael, my client, and I said to him, I don't know anything about EV space, but let me look into and research and see if Urban Science has something. Full circle comes around. I start navigating the web and seeing what's out there. I bump into ChargePoint. And around 2015, it was really, my purpose was to find data and turn it into something that we can leverage for Jaguar Land Rover. But in true fashion, at ChargePoint fashion, they asked if I was interested in working for them. And that was the universe giving me a sign and saying, hey, this is something good. But I'm very proud of my time at ChargePoint, because every time I drive by the Jaguar Land Rover HQ in Mahwah, New Jersey, and I see those CP 250s, those 10 CP 250s, one of the first ones out there, and the 22 CT 4000s out in their parking lot, every time I drive by there, it just tickles me to say, and I can show my boys. And every time I drive by them, I say, look, I installed those. I worked on those. So that's really my journey and how I got into the EV space. And it's definitely full of pride when I see that, especially that project and every charger that you see at dealerships that I help install. So yeah, definitely a proud moment.
Yeah, and it is worth being proud of, because it represents, there's a lot of work. You see a charger in the ground somewhere, there's a lot of work and a lot of intentionality that went into how it got there. It's funny, whenever I'm around a C-store, petroleum gas station, and I see a charger there, especially in the area that I live, and I know that I was a part of the conversation of that going into that site probably a year or two before that ground was even cleared and a gas station was built there and there was chargers being talked about. So I've literally charged at locations that I was a part of the origin of that even becoming a charging destination. And so anyways, long way of saying I relate to what you're saying. That is something to be proud of. And yeah, that was probably some early CP2 models,
Oh
250
yeah.
models as
Oh my
well. Some
God.
yeah,
Oh yeah, first gen probably. Actually, no, not probably. Yes, first gen.
yeah.
A lot of updates. I remember codes. I think putting your hat on, like I mentioned, servant leadership mindset, walking
Hmm.
into a customer thinking in that way. Customers are forgiving when it comes to like coming out with first gen or something like that because they know that you have you mean good.
Hmm.
So that it's always refreshing and rewarding to be able to go back to former clients. And still now I have former clients that are friends of mine because I have built that reputation of, hey, call me anytime. I'm here to help you and help serve in every way I can. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, as you've observed the EV industry scale,
Yeah.
what have you seen change in how companies are structured, how they're led, how they're organized, what the mission on the wall is versus the mission that's executed? If you could comment to that.
Yeah, so it brings me back when we first started. I think we viewed ourselves as missionaries, as people with purpose. So we weren't just putting a station in the ground. We were looking at the impact that we were going to leave. As I mentioned earlier, and why I got involved in the EV space was I had purpose. I had my kids, my twins, my wife, my family. I saw that that was better. I saw that the people I was surrounded thought the same way. So we were missionaries. Everyone came in with a purpose to leave a mark, reduce carbon emissions, and change the world. That's the way we felt. And that's how we treated our customers. I see as the industry scaled, then that North Star route shifted. Definitely. It definitely shifted. And I saw that we moved from building a mission to building an IPO. And it became more of that IPO. Yeah, it was great. It was fun. Nothing, the first time I ever experienced that myself at ChargePoint. Leadership change, we brought in, which is fine, which is great. And I'm not faulting them, but
Mhm.
they brought in experienced executives who focus on, I want to call it the gold rush.
Okay.
That was the new gold rush.
Hmm.
How do we leverage this experience that they've done with other companies and bring it into this company that challenged, the status quo of the traditional automotive, and that's where things started to shift. People versus, we stopped treating the industry like a movement, but it started feeling more like a commodity. That's where we lost, the people dealing with people. I don't know if you understand what I mean by that. So that, in that aspect, I think back in my hospitality days when I was in Hilton, we always carried around our mission statement. And
Mm.
one of the values was, you're serving ladies and gentlemen, so treat yourselves like ladies and gentlemen. So treat others that you're dealing with. Doesn't matter who it is as ladies and gentlemen. So, and I looked at when we first started missionaries for the EV space, and then we shift into like, okay, we need to make a lot of money and it wasn't mission driven. And then, you have a lot of these companies that come in now in place that, they follow the incentive. They just open up just to grab as much as they can and treat people like, okay, you're done. Goodbye.
Yeah.
So that's how I've seen a lot of things, how the industry has changed a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen similar things. I've observed that in that gold rush mindset, quick buck in EV, quick buck in EV chargers. That's not attached to reality. We know that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But yet there are those that have that mindset. And so there's been companies that not only in their fundraising rush
mm-hmm,
that to your point about keeping the people, the human side of the business in the equation, talent has become somewhat of I've seen it. Talent has become somewhat of a fundraising prop in that an EV company will bring in a high profile person or fabricator and embellish a role to raise capital or to signal something to the markets, signal something to the competitor, signal
mm-hmm,
something
mm-hmm.
to an investor, signal something to someone. And so it's like it's like what you're talking about. Chargers are somewhat of a commodity, but how is it
Yeah.
that people are becoming commoditized in the space? And so I guess the question is how, in your observations, how common has this been? And what do you think it does to the credibility of the EV ecosystem?
It hurts us. It definitely hurts us. Definitely, I agree with you. Companies hire high profile names. It's some type, like you mentioned, fluff rolls. It signals credibility to the investors. They raise that money. It damages twofold, right? It creates a culture of make believe or la la land or theater, let's call
Mm.
it,
Hmm.
rather than building, you know, a culture that is going to have a strong foundation that you can build on top of and then continue to grow. I mean, when these I'm going to call these props eventually leave or fail because they don't have the dirt under their nails, it stains the entire EV ecosystem. It makes us all look like a bubble rather than a legitimate infrastructure shift, for
Mm.
example.
Mm.
And it saddens me because I know a lot of great talented people that I worked with that are not working right now. And it's because we are subject matter experts, and in the beginning stages of our industry, we were being thrown, all good money. Now that we're it rose through the ranks, our experience becomes a little bit more pricey. And now the industry has shifted where it has to correct itself when it comes to how they were paying in many cases. But I think those earlier stains definitely hurts those that really care,
Hmm.
that really have that purpose, that believe in the EV space, that want to see more electrification and shift into alternative fuels, and seeing an ecosystem that's going to not only flourish for the EV space, but anything that's alternative fuel, because we can't be dependent on one fuel. But definitely hurts us for sure as
Yeah.
an industry.
Yeah, I know it's almost like extracting the energy out of the CP250 with its 62.5 kilowatts. Well, now we only want to talk about 150 kilowatts. So
Yeah.
goodbye 50 kilowatt, goodbye 62. We've extracted your value. You're now out of spec. And so it's from the inside, there are typically warning signs that a company is being performative rather than
Hmm.
actually
Hmm.
progressing. You've mentioned colleagues, friends in the space
Hmm.
that are now without a job because they were a victim of an RIF, because that RIF was fueled by a catalyst that could have been. And I mean, we've seen lots of money be dropped into companies, and then I don't know what happens. There's always a tale to tell, and there's always you could always go and look at the forensics of it and see what really happened. But the people are becoming collateral in that, and they're being affected. And so you've no doubt seen some warning signs from
Yep.
that performative versus really progressing. And so what would you encourage those that are maybe sitting on the sidelines to an RIF because of that, or maybe they don't know where their job sits tomorrow? And what are some signs that they need to be looking at, whether they evaluate a company that they might join, might want to leave, might want to stay? What comments in that area?
Yeah, listen to your gut. I gotta say that
Mm.
because I didn't listen to
Okay.
my gut for many, many, many times, and I just went with it, just keeping that,
Mm.
And sometimes just you have to take off those rosy glasses and maybe talk to somebody that gives you that truth that you don't want to hear. You are easy to talk yourself into something. Like I'm very easy to talk myself into something. But if you talk to, like, I have a good friend that actually a former charge pointer that I reach out to, and she tells me the way it is. Like
Mm.
it's just amazing, right? But I like going back to, like, the human capital is being so devalued at the same rate as, like you mentioned, as whole hardware. I compare like pawns on a chessboard in many cases.
Okay.
A lot of leaders forget that they're dealing with people who have families
Mm.
and lives. So that's one thing that it's easy for us. And I've been at the boardroom or at an organization where we're all looking at an org sheet, and looking to move someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without thinking, is that something they want to do? Have we had those conversations? So I think transparency is the biggest thing that you want to look for in an organization. Sure, there's some things that you're not going to be privy to, but that's fine. So if you see, I think a big, big, big red flag is financial desperation, masked as progress, for example. When you hear of an owner or CEO, founder asking for a 60% deposit, what does that say to you? They're fi- they're running out of cash. They need cash, right? That's a big, red flag. And, you may not think of it because, oh, okay, maybe this is something they do. But that's, you should ask, like, why are we asking for money, that much money? Another sign is a values gap. So if a company has core values just written on the wall, but the leadership doesn't live them, and they don't treat people like ladies and gentlemen, that's a company that's just a shell. They don't believe in those core values,
Mhm.
because if I believe in the core values, I'm going to lead and create policies based on those core values. And I'll give you the example. When I was with Flash Parking, I loved working at Flash because we had some core values that I can actually relate to, for example. And I can even easily tell you right now, teach. It spells out the word teach. Really easy for me as a leader to remember: transparency, empathy, action, commitment, and hard work. I remember those things like till this day. Same thing at Turntide Technologies, but we lived and breathed it, and those core values made me a better leader. So whenever you see leadership and they can't tell you what their core values are, that's a that's like, okay. But those are things that I picked up on so far.
That's insightful, and I hope those that are listening take that to heart, especially if they're looking at a move in this space. Maybe they're on the outside looking in, and that's that. You've shared some really important wisdom, I think, in that, because it falls into that intangibles category. Mission statement is important. What the vision is, what our core values are, all of that is important. It's not just rhetoric, or shouldn't be. It's not just aspirational. It should be really what's the driving factor. What motivates me, what keeps me away from the Sunday scaries, and keeps me motivated on Monday. Nobody
That's
likes
right.
the Sunday scaries, and I've worked
That's
for
right.
companies in this space where I had the Sunday scaries. I was
Yeah.
dreading Monday. I didn't want to
Oh
get
yeah.
up. I didn't want to log on. I didn't want to start going through, because I knew that my value was strictly attached to a number that was on a board. And the moment that that number was not guaranteed, I was collateral. I'm just a line on a budget sheet, and you're gone. And, I've never been released from a company in this space, knock on wood here, but,
Mm.
but at the same time, it was always in the back of my mind. Wow. It's like, what does tomorrow really, really hold? And so, those intangibles, EV companies, they obsess over utilization, uptime, cost curves, because that's what's making them profit. That's what's keeping the lights on. It's important to obsess over that. But there's been other things neglected, like what you're talking about. Another thing is the aspect of communication. Like you said, what's the culture? What's that cultural continuity look like? What is that transparency? I mean, we know what transparency is, but it's not always a clear path to what is conveying that transparency. And then conversely, there's sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and it's kind of probably hidden behind a curtain for a reason. And those are the things that have to be addressed. We have an industry colleague, a mutual friend, Anoop Parikh. I
Hmm.
saw on LinkedIn
Hmm. Yeah,
recently
yeah,
where
yeah.
he did a poll wanting to, asking about budget around storytelling. Are companies looking at storytelling? Have you budgeted this, that, or nothing? Storytelling even on your radar. And so those are soft elements that I think are
There's
pointing to
some
that.
there's survival requirements,
Yeah.
Jason.
Okay. Say
It's
more.
it's it's EV companies are so obsessed with uptime, cost curves, how many ports, how many, NEVI fund, whatever it is, the flavor of the month, flavor of the quarter, but they neglect to Noop's point, and what you just said about Noop, storytelling and culture.
Mm,
And those aren't just soft skills. Like I said, they're survival skills. And when things get tough, and in EV, they always do and always have been and will be for a
mhm,
while, because there's going to
mhm,
be a lot of changes coming up. Utilization rates and cost curves and how many ports won't keep your best talent from leaving. They're
yeah.
not. They're going to leave, and they're going to go to other industries. Only a shared mission and a strong internal culture can do that. If you don't document your why as to why you're doing this, you're just selling a box in a parking lot, and you know what? It's empty, like a shell. So, or an empty box. So I think, it's a requirement. It
Mm,
has to be a requirement. I learned from one of the best, and a shout out to my friend Mike DiNucci, one of the
mhm,
best storytellers I've ever met. And just having a conversation with him, you see those soft skills. And till this day, I use many of the things that he taught, but he's one storytelling. That's, very rarely did you actually. I never saw Mike take out a PowerPoint.
mm.
You know,
Mm.
It was always conversation, storytelling, telling something, but he was one of the most effective, the first salesperson at ChargePoint.
Hmm.
And till this day, he's a friend, and I admire his skill set, and he has an art and a science for sure.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Mike DiNucci. When I first got into the space, it was 2016, 2017. I didn't know what the questions were, much less, I didn't know left from right. So I was watching YouTube videos of Mike DiNucci and how he would speak to the narratives of ChargePoint, and I was
Yeah.
listening. He was teaching me without even knowing who I am. Probably didn't know who I am today, but he helped inform me. I know who he is. I know that he's part of the leadership team over at Amp Up, I believe now.
Yes, he
And
is.
yeah,
Yes.
so you need to ping him and tell him, come on Field Frequency, and let's have a conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Once it's posted, I will make sure to send him a copy and say, "Hey, your name came up."
Yeah, we're shouting out some people. We're gonna have to key up Anoop as well. Let him know
That's right.
his
That's
ears
right.
may be burning right now. But
That's right. That's right.
yeah, but so you've been in the space what, a decade or nearly a decade in this industry, spread across
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
companies. Yeah, so you've been around. You've seen the projects. You've seen the teams. You've seen companies rise up and companies disappear and drop apart, fall apart. So what do you think? And I know we've talked around this, but I just want to hear why do you think so few companies bother to document? We talked about core values, but EV companies don't seem to bother documenting what they're building. Maybe some do, maybe some, but I don't think I've seen many doing that and to document what they're building and how the decisions are made. That, again, going back to that transparency and what actually is motivating them to move forward.
Yeah, I gotta say, companies are getting better at documenting in comparison when I first started in the industry. Like they've noticed that they need to do a better job of documenting. But I just feel like many companies don't because it's the easiest path to just again, they're just focused on the gold rush. We need to sell. We need to sell. We need to sell versus document. Again, I think that because we don't document our history, we're repeating the same mistakes. We lose that human layer of the project. We don't sunshine. We don't make things open where we learn from those. I didn't even call them issues, gifts and opportunities to grow. You know, if you ever have a chance to read a book, the Netflix by Netflix, the Netflix story is called. It's about their culture. It's so ingrained in them that if something goes wrong, they bring it up. They call it, they sunshine it. Without you always hear companies, oh, bring it forward. Nothing's going to happen to you. I've been in those environments where they say that, and it's always like, should I say? Because my CRO is going to definitely, say to the VP of sales when it's up for promotion time, remember what happened that time? You shouldn't promote him. So if it's not, again, it goes back to that core value. If it's not ingrained, if it's not part of the culture of being able to tell things when are not going in the right direction, people are not going to say, and people are not going to document. They're just going to let it go. But yeah, we don't do a good job. I want my sons not to see. For example, I want my sons to see not just chargers I build, but to understand the work and the integrity that went into them.
Mhm.
And I've exposed them to friends of mine, and we talk about that. So it's not, so content is in marketing, is memory. So again, storytelling, when I get
Mhm.
together with Angela, Debbie, or Jeannie, we're not talking about the marketing that worked. We're talking about us, like what we did. We picked up the phone instead of going to customer support. We went and flew wherever we needed to do, but we had
Mhm.
that purpose, Jason. So I really wish people would document just to have that story, making sure that we won't have white blank pages when people start talking about the EV industry.
Well, that's good. Given your time in the space, and maybe
Mhm.
maybe you got some advice to others for experienced professionals, maybe already in the industry or considering entering the industry. What are some non-obvious questions that they need to be asking that recruiter, that
Yeah.
interview panel before they commit their time?
Yeah. So like if you like if I were to think back in some of the interviews before you commit your reputation to any company, ask leadership, like show me a time when you stood by your core values. When it costs you a sale or a deposit, for example, or, you can put those same type of questions. And you keep in mind, you're interviewing them to see if they're a good fit. People forget that you need to interview the other person too and ask the tough questions and be prepared to ask some financial questions about the company. Find out and inquire, is this position a new position or someone was in this position? And if someone was in that position, what happened to that person?
Hmm.
If it's a new position, you should ask the question, I guess sales are good and you have the money to hire. So that should, bring up the conversation that way. I would definitely go and see, and maybe not phrase in this way, how do you view people on your org chart? Are there assets to be developed or is components to be utilized? Again, there's a softer way to probably ask, especially if you're interviewing. What is the North Star of the company?
Mm.
If if for example, if government incentives disappeared, what is that North Star? Which, government incentives are disappearing and moving away more from the industry. But those are, again, financial, people, and, again, values. Like those are the
Mhm.
three bullet points that I would focus on.
Yeah, that's good. You said about assets on the org chart. Are they assets or are there a couple of letters too many, a few letters too many?
Yeah. Yeah, think about it. Are they assets to be developed? That means they're willing to invest in your training, or are they components to be utilized? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that'll tell you a lot about the leader that you're going to work for.
Well, Eduardo, this has been a good conversation. I appreciate you sharing these insights. I think we on these episodes sometimes get into technology, get into charger stuff, we get into all kinds of things. But this conversation has been about the human layer. It's been about the people behind the mission, the people in the mission. With a focus on being successful, but also keeping the human in. And I appreciate the wisdom that you've shared in the comments that you've made. It's been insightful and very helpful. Any parting shots of wisdom or any insights you want to share?
For me, thank you, Jason, for inviting me. This is always great to share what you've learned through your career journey and so on. And this is just another form of me giving back to people that I know and people that I may not know that hope to please meet in one day and connect with me on LinkedIn. Please ask me questions. I just hope that people adopt the ladies and gentlemen standard. They adopt them to themselves too, and personally and professionally. And if you're a leader, and you have the mentality of, of this mentality, stop that chessboard mentality. Think of the people. And lastly, if you're in a leadership position and you can definitely influence the values or the core values at your company, don't just make it about a marketing brochure. Live the values, show that you live the values. It's not too late to start. And then if you're not sure, pick up some books to teach you. There's plenty of books out there that can help you navigate the waters of core values, or put something in ChatGPT to start. There's so many tools out there now that you can definitely leverage. But no, Jason, this has been great. I look forward to seeing your success. And like I said to the audience before, please connect with me on LinkedIn. And I look forward to seeing everybody succeed and cheering for everybody.
All right. Thank you for being on Field Frequency.
Thank you.
This episode was produced and edited by the team at Autozi. To find out more, visit autozi.co, autozy.co.